People who fly commercial intercraft for a living are trained to trust the instruments in front of them. Their entire environment is built on physics, checklists, and cold, hard data. They are the absolute last people you would expect to report something supernatural. But throughout the 1970s, Eastern Airlines began receiving a string of bizarre, highly documented incident reports from their most rational employees, particularly those stationed on a specific route, Flight 318. It started with unsettling glimpses. Flight attendants would walk down the aisle and spot a fully uniformed pilot sitting quietly in an otherwise empty row. But when they approached to speak to him, the seat would be vacant. The sightings escalated significantly during one particularly packed holiday flight. Air hostess Faye Merriweather was rushing through an empty galley section, tasked with preparing hot meals for 180 passengers with only 2 hours on the clock. She reached out to pull open the oven door, but the reflection staring back at her from the glass was not her own. It was the face of a man, and he was urgently repeating a warning: "Watch out for a fire on this flight." Terrified, Faye ran to get the flight engineer. When he hurried back to the galley and looked at the reflection in the glass, he immediately recognized the face. It was his friend and colleague, Don Repo. There was only one problem. Don Repo wasn't assigned to this route. He wasn't even alive. He had died in a violent plane crash years earlier. To figure out how Don Repo's face ended up staring out of an oven door, we have to look back to 1972, to a flight that never made it to its destination. Flight 401 was approaching Florida with a highly experienced crew at the controls. As they readied for descent, the pilots became entirely fixated on diagnosing a single broken indicator light for their landing gear. While the crew crowded around the console trying to figure out the landing gear, one of them accidentally nudged the flight yoke. That tiny bump silently disengaged the autopilot. Because every eye in the cockpit was locked on that one faulty light bulb, nobody noticed the flight instruments. The plane was slowly and steadily losing altitude in the pitch-black night. Flight 401 plowed directly into the Florida Everglades. The impact killed over 100 people, including Don Repo and the rest of the flight crew in the cockpit. A microscopic mechanical oversight had destroyed a massive machine and ended dozens of lives. It left behind a profound psychological weight on the survivors and an immense sense of unfinished business. As the initial shock of the tragedy passed, the airline was left facing a very practical, very expensive problem regarding the wreckage. Because the plane hit the swamp at a shallow angle, many of the internal mechanical components survived the impact completely intact. To save money, management decided to pull those valuable parts straight out of the mud. Mechanics quietly cleaned up the salvaged parts, certified them for use, and installed them directly into brand new aircraft joining the active fleet. Internal flight logs revealed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Every aircraft plagued by reported sightings was operating with at least one mechanical component pulled from the mud of the Everglades. In their attempt to recycle expensive physical machinery, the airline had inadvertently recycled the trauma of the crash itself. They had turned their modern airplanes into haunted vessels. Back in the present day, on Flight 318, the situation in the air quickly deteriorated. Shortly after takeoff, the plane's engine began to fail, exactly as the face in the oven had warned. Shaken by Don Repo's supernatural warning, the crew explicitly broke from their standard procedures. They refused to push the failing engine any harder, a decision that ultimately prevented a catastrophic fire from breaking out. Don Repo hadn't returned to the skies to terrorize his former colleagues. He was there to do the one thing he couldn't do in 1972, watch the instruments and ensure the flight landed safely. Having lost their own lives to a tiny, overlooked detail, the deceased crew members had seemingly returned as an ultimate supernatural failsafe. They were making sure no one else made the same mistakes. Faced with undeniable crew hysteria and a string of bizarre, highly accurate mechanical saves, airline management quietly issued a new directive. Mechanics were ordered to hunt down and strip every single salvaged part out of the active fleet. Once the scrap material was removed and an exorcism was reportedly performed on Flight 318, the sightings abruptly stopped. The crews never saw Don Repo again. Whether you view this as actual ghosts haunting a machine or the psychological manifestation of severe survivor's guilt, the legend leaves us with a lingering question. We can never know for certain if every single recycled piece was found, leaving us to wonder if parts of Flight 401 are still flying today.